don't understand. It says the house was transferred to a stranger.
What? Let me see that paper. This is impossible.
This property deed is a fake. You know this isn't my signature. I assure you, ma'am, everything is handled. I didn't forge anything.
The agent dropped the deed on the table with a loud thud. I picked it up fast, and my heart almost stopped when I saw the name written at the top. It wasn't mine. It wasn't my father's. It was a stranger's name, Chimamanda Ibe. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My hands shook as I read the words again and again. This was our house, the one my father promised me since I was a child. How could someone else's name be there? The agent cleared his throat. Madam Ifunaya, your father signed everything. The house now belongs to Mrs. Ibe. I stood up sharply. Signed what? My father can barely hold a pen. The papers were all stamped and marked irrevocable transfer. My chest felt tight. My childhood, my memories, my mother's flowers, all gone on paper. This was no mistake. Someone wanted our home, and they believed I would not fight back. I drove straight to the house. My heart beat fast as I turned into our street. But what I saw made my knees weak. A moving truck was parked in front of the gate. Two strangers were carrying furniture inside. A woman in a yellow gown stood at the entrance holding keys. "Good afternoon," she said. "Are you looking for someone?" "This is my father's house," I replied. She blinked. The man beside her opened a folder. "Madam, the house now belongs to Mrs. Chimamanda Ibe." The woman raised her hand. "That's me." My stomach tightened. My father would never sell this house. She sighed softly. "Madam, we bought it legally. Please, we don't want trouble."
Completely legally.
Those words felt like fire in my ears. The house where my mother used to cook pepper soup, where I learned to ride my bicycle, now belonged to strangers. As I walked away, only one thought stayed in my mind. Someone planned this, and I needed to know who. I rushed to my father's assisted living home. The place felt too quiet. When I opened this door, the room was tidy but empty. I asked the nurse, "Where is my father?" She said, "Oh, Madam Ifunaya, he went outside with a visitor." A visitor? My father hardly had any visitors. Outside, under the mango tree, I saw him sitting beside a woman holding a brown envelope. She leaned close to him, speaking softly. "Just put your thumb here, sir. It is for your good." My father nodded slowly, looking confused. "Daddy!" I called. The woman straightened quickly and forced a polite smile. "Oh, you must be his daughter. We were just finishing some documents." Documents again. My father looked up at me. "Naya, she's helping me." Helping him? No. This was how they took the house. And if I didn't stop this, they would take more than property. They would take everything he owned. I went to the bank the next morning. I needed answers. I needed proof. When I met the teller and explained the situation, she printed several pages of transactions. My eyes widened as I flipped through them. Large withdrawals, transfers to strange accounts, signatures that looked like my father's handwriting, but shaky and strange. I showed the advisor. He shrugged. "Everything appears legal. Your father agreed to it." How could they all repeat the same lie? I stepped outside, the sun burning hot on my skin. Something wasn't right. Someone had guided my father into signing things he didn't understand. Someone had used his trust. I folded the bank papers and placed them carefully in my bag. If they wanted to fight with documents, I would collect my own, one by one. Later that day, my older sister, Amaka, called me. Her voice sounded too soft, too careful. Nania, calm down, she said. Don't stress yourself. I frowned. Amaka, did you know about this? There was silence, then a small sigh. I only signed a small paper, she whispered. They said it was harmless. They said it would help Daddy. I closed my eyes. This cut deeper than any document. I signed what? I asked quietly. I'm sorry. I didn't know, she said. But her apologies didn't return stolen houses. They didn't erase mistakes. I ended the call slowly, feeling something heavy settle inside my chest. My sister had been used. My father had been manipulated. And I was now the only one left to fight. I went home that night and searched through old family boxes. Something told me my father must have left clues. He trusted me. He always did. Inside an old carton, under faded photographs, I found a small shoebox tied with a string. Inside were letters, all written by my father, addressed to me, but never delivered. One note made my hands shake. If anything happens, you will know what to do. Tears filled my eyes. He had sensed danger. He had known someone was coming for his property, and he trusted me to protect what belonged to him. I wiped my face and closed the box. Whoever was behind this plan was about to meet the wrong daughter. The next morning, I met a probate lawyer named Barrister Oke. He listened quietly as I laid out everything. He nodded slowly. Your father was signing documents during a time when his medicine could affect his mind. That is important. He flipped through the transfer file. This was done very fast. Too fast. My heart raced. So we can fight this? He looked up at me. Yes, we have grounds, but we must act carefully. For the first time since this nightmare started, I felt a little hope. I will do whatever it takes, I said. He smiled gently. Then let's begin. I found the trustee, the man who claimed to be managing my father's affairs, sitting in a quiet cafe in Independence Layout. He smiled too much, too politely. Madam Ufunanya, he said, everything was done for your father's comfort. I placed the bank papers and photocopies on the table. Who arranged the medical evaluations? Who told you he was able to sign anything? His hand trembled slightly as he lifted his cup. You are misunderstanding. No, I said firmly. You are lying. His smile faded. That small reaction told me more than his words. They never expected me to investigate. They never expected me to fight. They thought I would break quietly. They were wrong. After our cafe meeting, I went back to the bank. I asked for more records. The teller frowned but printed everything she could. There were receipts, transfer slips, and a line that kept showing up. Zuri Holdings, a company I'd never heard of. Money moved from my father's account into that company, then out to other places. I also found a set of emails between the trustee, Mr. Eze, and a realtor named Mr. Onu. The emails talked about a quick flip and called a buyer favorable. They wrote in short, calm sentences like this was normal business. When I read the words, my hands shook again. They had planned this. I copied the emails and put them in my bag. Outside, the sun sat heavy over Independence Layout. People walked by with shopping bags and children on their shoulders. Life went on for everyone else. But for me, time had changed. I was collecting proof, and every paper was another step toward taking the house back. Barrister Oke called me with a small, urgent voice.
A woman wanted to speak. She said she knew things. She said she was afraid. We met at a quiet place near the market. The woman's name was Grace. She used to work for Mr. Eze. Her hands were rough from cleaning documents. She kept glancing at the door. "I packed the files," she whispered. "I was told to make him comfortable. They asked me to arrange times for visits. They texted me what to say." She showed me messages from Mr. Eze, instructions to bring water, to put calming music on, to make sure my father took extra medicine the day of signing. She also had an old calendar invite that showed who was at the meeting the day the papers were signed. Her voice cracked when she said, "I thought it was just paperwork. I did not know." Grace's words were small but sharp. They fit with the bank records. They made the plan look clearer. I felt grateful and sad. Someone was brave enough to tell the truth. We asked the court to let us see my father's medical notes. The hospital files arrived in thick folders. The pages showed changes, new medicines, higher doses, and notes that said decision-making support recommended. The timing was strange. The medicines were changed just days before the transfer signing. Dr. Onaji had signed papers saying my father understood what he was doing, but the notes showed confusion, forgetfulness, and tired days. The doctor was also listed in a record as having worked with a firm tied to Mr. Eze. That link felt wrong. Barrister Oki frowned as he read. "This looks like undue influence," he said. "They used medicine and meetings to make him say yes." I sat very still. People at the hospital talked like it was ordinary. "Some elders need help with decisions," one nurse said. But the papers looked deliberate. The dates, the doses, the visits, all lined up. I felt anger like a hot wind. They had used my father's weakness to steal our house. I would not let it stand. Mr. Eze called a family meeting at a guest house. He smiled in a way that tried to make everything soft. The room had cool fans and cold water. He carried a folder and sat like a man in charge. "I want peace for the family," he said. "This transfer was for your father's comfort." His words were smooth. I asked him straight, who arranged the medical tests? Who advised my father? He answered with calm phrases about legal process and good care. My sister Amaka stayed quiet. Her eyes moved like someone who carried a secret. My hands closed into a small, hard knot. I told Mr. Eze I had found payments and messages. He shifted, just a little. He then offered a deal. Some money, visits, and a public note about how kind he had been. "Think of peace," he said. Peace. The word felt like a trap. I looked at my father sitting in the corner, too tired to argue. I refused. I could not trade his home for polite words. This house was his story. I would fight. When news of the fight reached our street, whispers began. Neighbors stopped in doorways to watch. Some sided with me. Others looked worried. A few shook their heads and talked about family troubles like it was a common story. A cousin I had not seen in years sent a message offering help, but he wanted something small in return. I declined. I did not want favors with strings. Small shops in the area hummed with gossip. People wondered if I had been a bad daughter. I answered a few questions and kept my face calm. I felt lonely, even with people around. Sometimes the village can be kinder, but now the village looked like a dividing line. At night, I sat on the porch and stared at the quiet street. My father slept inside. The house rested like a thing that belonged to us. Sometimes I would hear a distant bus horn and imagine the house empty. Those images made me move faster. I could not let them become real. Amaka sent me a photo by mistake. It showed my father at a charity lunch with Mr. Eze and Mrs. Chimamanda Ibe smiling near him. The photo was warm and bright. Amaka wrote, "He seems happy." But I had learned to read pictures differently. I went back to the files and looked harder. I found a flash drive hidden under his stack of receipts in the real estate folder. Inside were contracts and transfer forms signed weeks before. There was also a sheet listing payments into Zuri Holdings. The flash drive was like a secret box that someone forgot to hide well. The papers showed dates and names. Someone had made a small, careful path to take the house. They used friendly faces and soft meetings to hide a plan. I held the flash drive like a small lamp. The light it gave was sharp and honest. I felt more sure. Now I had documents and pictures. The picture of my father smiling did not make me weak. It made me angry. After my findings, the pressure increased. A man from the trustee's office left a note at my gate. "Let this rest for the family's sake." The handwriting was polite, but the message felt like a push. I also received a call from someone who claimed to be a friend. He warned me that going to court would take time and money. He said some things are better left alone. I sat with Barrister Oke and we planned. He said legal fights can be long and tiring, and often people give up. I nodded. I felt fear, but fear did not stop me. I felt my father's small words in my ears. Protect home. I wrote back to the man who left the note. I wrote that I would not be bought. I would not let a few loud men shape my family's story. The night felt heavy, but I slept with the feeling that I had made a promise to my father and I would keep it.
Grace, the former assistant, agreed to speak more. She showed me a folder with messages and a small calendar they used to plan visits. The dates all matched the day the transfer happened. She told me about a van that came to the lodge one morning. They said to make him calm, she said. They told me to give him the blue pills. Grace pointed to a row in the messages. The messages were simple. Make sure he eats. Bring music. Thumb here. When I read them, my stomach turned. They had used small, comforting things to hide a big plan. It was not loud theft. It was quiet work. I kept Grace's folder safe and took copies to my lawyer. Barrister Oke said these messages were strong proof. We could show a judge that people had worked to make my father agree when he could not. It felt like a step closer to bringing the truth into the light. We filed the petition at the High Court. The papers were thick with copies. Bank records, the flash drive list, medical notes, and Grace's messages. The court clerk stamped them and gave us a date. A temporary order stopped any sale or move on the house for now. Walking out of the court, I felt a small light in my chest. The law had a name for what we argued: undue influence. We said Mr. Eze used medicine, visits, and paperwork to make my father sign. We wanted the transfer voided. At home, my father slept under the mango tree. He looked thin but peaceful. I sat beside him and held his hand. He squeezed back slowly, as if he knew I was doing something. I told him softly, "I won't let them take this away." He blinked and smiled a little. No words, but I felt he understood. That small look kept me going.
The story leaked to the press. A small paper ran with the headline, "Daughter Challenges Transfer." Another blog made me seem angry and wild. People sent messages, some kind, some cruel. My phone buzzed with strangers. At first, I tried to ignore it. Then I realized the leak had a use. People began to ask questions. A neighbor came to tell me that Mr. Onu had been seen signing papers late at night. Another person said they had heard of Zuri holdings being used by others. Public eyes can be helpful. They make people careful. The trustee began to look nervous in public. He stopped going to his usual meetings. The realtor answered fewer calls. The small ripple I had made was growing. I felt a mix of fear and hope. The road was still hard, but now it was not only my fight. The town watched.
Court called for depositions. People had to tell the truth on paper, under oath. Mr. Eze sat stiff in front of the lawyer. His voice tried to stay calm. He said the transfer was legal and in my father's best interest. He used words like process and procedure. Then Grace's messages were read aloud. The judge's clerk recorded the dates and times. Dr. Naji's notes were shown. The more papers we presented, the smaller Mr. Eze looked. He tried to say he did not remember details, but the calendar invites and texts had names. They matched those who were at the visits. When my sister Amaka spoke, she said she had felt pressured and sorry. The room was quiet. Truths in court sound dull, but they hurt in a steady way. Each paper was a small hammer. Slowly, the plan that took the house started to break. After the depositions, Amaka asked to speak with me alone. We sat on the low wall near the garden. Her hands were shaking. "I thought I was helping," she said, tears in her eyes. "They told me it would make Daddy comfortable. They said it was just a paper." Her voice was small. I held her hand. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. She could not answer. Her apology sounded like a child's, honest and raw. I forgave her slowly. Forgiveness did not mean forgetting. It meant we had to fix this together. She promised to help however she could. That night, we made a plan. Amaka would speak at the next hearing and tell the court exactly what happened in her own words. The truth had a way of changing people's minds. I felt a weight lift from my chest, little by little. The day in court felt like a long, slow song. The judge listened to the papers, the messages, and the doctor's notes. Mr. Eze's lawyer argued hard about legality and witnesses. We argued harder about how the witnesses had been guided and how medicine and timing mattered. The judge asked quiet questions. The room was full of eyes. My heart beat loud, but I kept my face still. When the judge said he needed more time, my hands tightened. Time can be good or bad. It can let truth come out or let people hide. At the end of the day, the judge made a small, careful order, a temporary injunction. No moves or sales for the house until the court could finish hearing the case. It was not the end, but it was a shelter. We went home and breathed more easily that night. Pressure rose on Mr. Eze. Donors and committee people who had praised him started to ask questions. He left events and gave fewer speeches. The realtor, Mr. Onu, went quiet. The shell company accounts were being checked. Some neighbors came to tell me they were sorry and that they would help. Others still watched from doors, unsure which side to take. My phone rang late into the night with messages of support. I read them all. They kept me steady. Mr. Eze tried to push back with papers and warnings. He sent messages saying the fight would be long, but the town had eyes now. People asked tougher questions. I felt the ground change under those who had planned the theft. Their steps grew slower. The house breathed under the protection of the law and the watchful town.
When the final day came, the courtroom was full. The judge looked tired but steady. He read from notes and then spoke slowly. He said he had seen the records, messages, changed prescriptions, and the calendar invites. He said Mr. Eze had shown signs of pushing a plan forward while my father was weak. The judge's voice was calm as he said the words that made my knees bend. The transfer was voided due to undue influence. The deed returned to my father's estate. A neutral guardian, Mrs. Madueke, was placed temporarily to protect his interests. Mr. Eze's face changed color. The room filled with a small, stunned sound. I could not leap or shout. Instead, I sat very still and let the relief wash slowly into me like rain. For the first time in weeks, I felt the house belonged back to my family.
After the ruling, the trustee resigned from his posts. The shell company accounts were frozen while people checked the books. The realtor got inquiries about what he had told buyers. The town moved in small steps to fix what had been broken. I did not want to celebrate loudly. The harm had been real. People who had trusted now felt embarrassed. So I chose quiet walk. I met with the new guardian, Mrs. Madueke, and we made a plan to protect the house. We set up a clear trust with honest professionals. We wrote a letter to neighbors explaining what happened. At night, I sat on the porch and thought of my father sanding the rail. I felt tired but calm. Repair felt like steady work, slow and careful, like sewing a torn cloth back together.
Months later, the house felt like home again. The locks were new and the trust papers were clear. The mango tree still held its fruit. My father walked slowly in the yard and sat under the shade where he liked. He seemed a little lighter. Amaka came with a small box of his old tools and a wooden plane he had used. She apologized again in a way that showed growth. We sat and smoked polar nut together, small and quiet. Neighbors came to say hello and left warm foods. The town had learned something about listening. I did not feel like a hero. I felt like a woman who had kept a promise. The house was safe. The story of my father's care was in the right hands. I looked at the porch rail and ran my fingers over the smooth wood. I thought of the letters he wrote to me, and I felt his trust alive. Protecting that trust had been my work, and I would keep doing it.